When criminal organizations want to control a country, they do not start with soldiers. They start with politicians. A mayor who controls the local police can hand that police force over to a cartel. A minister of justice who oversees extradition can quietly make the paperwork disappear. A presidential candidate who wins an election can reshape every law the cartel fears. This is why the people in these cases were targeted. Not because they were powerful in a general sense, but because they held the specific kind of power that organized crime cannot function without. Mexico has seen more than 463,000 homicides since its government declared war on the cartels in 2006. Colombia lost 5 presidential candidates to cartel operations in a single decade. Ecuador, once considered the one country in the region that had avoided this entirely, watched a presidential candidate get taken from office in front of 10,000 people in 2023. Today we are covering 10 politicians who were taken from office for refusing cartel money. Case 1. Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, Colombia's Minister of Justice, 1984. Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was born on August 11, 1946, in Neiva, a city in southern Colombia. He studied law at the Universidad Externado de Colombia in Bogotá and entered politics young. By the time he was 23, he had already been elected mayor of his hometown. He was the kind of person who moved fast and made noise doing it. He joined a political movement called New Liberalism alongside his friend and fellow politician Luis Carlos Galán, and the two of them made a point of saying out loud what most Colombian politicians refused to even whisper. He was married to Nancy Restrepo Acevedo. He had children. He lived in the Recreo de los Frailes neighborhood in northern Bogotá, close to the government offices where he worked. By the time President Belisario Betancourt appointed him Minister of Justice in August 1983, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was 37 years old, had a full family at home, and had just been handed the most dangerous job in Colombia. The country he was stepping into was one where the Medellin trafficking organization, run by Pablo Escobar, had already accumulated more money than most South American governments. Escobar had bought his way into the Colombian Congress as an alternate representative, was funding sports teams and newspapers, and had so thoroughly woven his operation into the fabric of Colombian public life that most officials simply pretended it was not happening. The rule that the trafficking networks lived by was called plata o plomo, silver or lead, meaning you either took the money or you took a round. Most people took the money. Lara took neither. Within weeks of taking office, he stood up in front of the Colombian Congress and publicly named Pablo Escobar as a criminal. He did not imply it. He did not suggest it through carefully chosen language. He said it directly and backed it up with documentation. He exposed Escobar's history, including a prior arrest record for narcotics possession that had been quietly buried. He accused the trafficking organization of infiltrating Colombian soccer, with several of the country's top teams being funded by trafficking money. Escobar tried to fight back. An ally of his in Congress, a man named Jairo Ortega, produced a check in the legislature that was supposedly evidence that Lara himself had received trafficking money. But the check was later shown to have been falsified. President Betancourt looked at the situation, dismissed the accusation, and kept Lara exactly where he was. That decision cost Escobar his seat. With his criminal history now public and his congressional immunity stripped, Escobar was expelled from the legislature and his United States visa was canceled. Lara did not stop there. He canceled the flying permits of 250 aircraft connected to the trafficking operation. He revived criminal charges against other trafficking figures, including Carlos later. And then he directed a police colonel named Jaime Ramirez to follow a trail of chemical barrels, specifically ether, a key ingredient in cocaine production, through intermediaries until the trail led deep into the Colombian jungle. What they found there, in the Yari River region of southern Colombia, was called Tranquilandia. It was not a small laboratory. It was a self-contained compound with 9 separate processing facilities, housing for dozens of workers, its own generators, medical posts, and between 6 and 8 airstrips capable of landing cargo planes. Between March 7th and March 10th, 1984, Colombian police helicopters landed on those airstrips and took the place apart. They seized almost 14 tons of pure cocaine, worth approximately $1.2 billion, and poured it all into the Yari River. The river turned white. It was the largest cocaine seizure Colombia had ever conducted, and it was a direct result of Lara's work. Within days of the Tranquilandia raid becoming public on March 28, 1984, the threats against Lara and his family intensified to a point where his own government became alarmed. The American ambassador, Louis Arthur Tams, offered Lara a bulletproof vest and an armored vehicle. Lara accepted the vest, but turned down the car, saying he would not give the appearance of depending on American support, that Colombians would fight this fight themselves. President Betancourt, recognizing the level of danger, arranged for Lara to be appointed Colombia's ambassador to Czechoslovakia, a posting that would have gotten him out of the country before anything could happen to him. The transfer was scheduled for May 12, 1984. Rodrigo Lara Bonilla never made it. On the night of April 30th, 1984, Lara left his office and was being driven home through northern Bogotá. He was in his 1976 Mercedes-Benz, traveling along 127th Street toward the Recreo de los Frailes neighborhood, where his family was waiting. 2 men on a Yamaha DT-175 motorcycle pulled up alongside his car. The rider on the back was Iván Dario Guisado. He fired a MAC-10 through the window of the minister's car, hitting Lara multiple times. Lara was transferred to another vehicle and rushed to the Chaillot Clinic. He was declared gone minutes after arrival. His bodyguards shot and killed Guisado at the scene. The driver of the motorcycle, Byron Velasquez, known by the alias Quesito, was captured by police. He later told investigators he had been offered 2 million Colombian pesos, the equivalent of approximately $20,000 US at the time, to carry out the attack. The order had come from Medellin. Escobar fled to Panama with his family within days of the operation. The Colombian government's response was immediate. President Betancourt approved the extradition treaty with the United States the same week, the exact outcome Escobar had been trying to prevent when he ordered Lara's removal. Lara's successor as Justice Minister, Enrique Parejo González, continued the campaign and oversaw the extradition of 3 Medellin cartel members to the United States. The street in Bogotá where Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was shot was later renamed Avenida Rodrigo Lara Bonilla. His son, Rodrigo Lara Restrepo, went on to serve in the Colombian government for decades. In 2009, Rodrigo Lara Restrepo publicly forgave Juan Pablo Escobar, Pablo Escobar's son, after the younger Escobar issued an apology for the damage his father's operation had caused. Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was 37 years old when he was taken from his family. He had been Minister of Justice for exactly 8 months. The next case on this list involves a man who did not hold a national office. He was the mayor of a small city, and the cartel that came for him did not wait months. They came for him the morning after he was sworn in. Case 2. Luis Carlos Galán Sarmiento, Colombia's presidential candidate, 1989. Luis Carlos Galán Sarmiento was born on September 29, 1943, in Bucaramanga, a city in northeastern Colombia. He was one of 12 children. His father, Mario Galán, was a politician who later became president of the Colombian national oil company, Ecopetrol. When Luis Carlos was 6 years old, the family moved to Bogotá after his father faced political pressure during a violent period in Colombian history known as La Violencia. He studied law and economics at the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana in Bogotá, graduated in 1965, and went straight into journalism at El Tiempo, one of Colombia's most widely read newspapers. He married Gloria Pachón Castro, a journalist. They had 2 sons and a daughter. By 1970, he had been appointed Minister of National Education at just 27 years old, and by 1972, he was Colombia's ambassador to Italy. He was the kind of man who moved through rooms quickly and left an impression. In 1979, Galán founded a political movement called New Liberalism, a branch of the Liberal Party built specifically around cutting ties between established politics and criminal money. By the early 1980s, what that meant in practice was one thing above all else: Pablo Escobar. Escobar had made himself one of the wealthiest people in the world through cocaine trafficking and had decided he wanted a political career to go with it. In 1982, he got himself elected to the Colombian Congress as an alternate representative. That same year, Escobar tried to become a member of Galán's New Liberalism movement. Galán publicly refused him, stated on record that Escobar had no place in his party, and went further. He stood in front of a crowd of 5,000 people and denounced Escobar by name. That had simply never been done before by a politician of Galán's standing. Escobar did not forget it. Throughout the mid-1980s, Galán continued building his political movement while consistently doing the one thing that made the entire trafficking world nervous: he championed extradition. Colombia did not at that point have a working treaty to send its citizens to face trial in the United States, and every major trafficking organization in the country wanted to keep it that way. Escobar in particular had built his entire survival strategy around never being placed in an American courtroom. His network spent years bribing and pressuring Colombian officials and judges to ensure that extradition stayed off the table. Galán's position was the opposite. He argued that extradition was essential, that Colombian courts were too corrupted to handle these cases properly, and that sending trafficking leaders to the United States was the only way to break their power. In 1984, when Carlos Leder, one of the Medellin cartel's founding figures, was arrested and extradited to the United States, Galán pointed to it as proof that his approach worked. By 1989, Galán had rejoined the main Liberal Party and was its official presidential candidate for the 1990 election. His popularity was not close. Polls had him at 60%. The election itself was essentially considered settled. He announced his candidacy formally on July 4, 1989, at the Tequendama Hotel in Bogotá, and his promise of a full crackdown on trafficking organizations and the activation of an extradition treaty went straight to the top of his campaign platform. The calls to his home started almost immediately after the announcement. Threatening leaflets were left in his mailbox. He was warned, repeatedly and by people close to him, that he was being targeted. He kept campaigning. On August 4, 1989, an attack on Galán in Medellin was stopped before it happened. A neighbor spotted armed men behaving suspiciously, called the police, and the operation was disrupted before it could be carried out. 2 weeks later, Galán's own intelligence sources told his security team that a group of hired attackers had moved to Bogotá, and that he should not travel to the municipality of Soacha, just south of the capital, where he was scheduled to speak. His campaign manager, Cesar Gaviria, warned him directly. Galán changed nothing about his schedule. He said he was going to Soacha. On the evening of August 18, 1989, Galán walked onto a stage in Soacha's main square to address a crowd of around 10,000 people. He was wearing a bulletproof vest and was accompanied by 18 bodyguards. At approximately 8:30 in the evening, as he climbed onto the stage, he was shot 5 times. He was rushed to a hospital and died on the way. A bodyguard and a local official were also hit and did not survive. The attackers had been positioned within the crowd. In 1992, Escobar's top operative, John Jairo Velázquez, known as Popeye, was arrested and eventually convicted in connection with the attack. In a 1996 interview, Popeye stated plainly that Escobar ordered Galan's removal because the polls made it clear he was going to win, and if he won, extradition was coming. Liberal politician Alberto Santofimio, who had long been connected to Escobar, was later convicted of playing a role in organizing the operation against Galan. In 2016, the former head of Colombia's intelligence agency, Miguel Maza Marquez, was convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison for deliberately weakening Galan's security detail in the lead-up to the attack. Colombia's response in the days after the shooting was immediate. President Virgilio Barco Vargas signed emergency extradition orders. The Medellin cartel retaliated by forming a group called the Extraditables, who carried out a campaign of bombings and targeted attacks across the country. The week Galan was shot, 2 other senior officials were also attacked. The police chief of Antioquia province was shot leaving his home in Medellin, and an appeals court judge was attacked within hours of issuing arrest warrants against Escobar. 50 out of 55 appeals court judges in Bogotá resigned. Around Colombia, 4,500 judges went on strike. The country was coming apart at exactly the moment the cartel had planned for. Cesar Gaviria, the man who had warned Galan not to go to Soacha and who had managed his campaign, was named as Galan's political successor by the Galan family. He ran in the 1990 election and won the presidency. He would go on to oversee Escobar's surrender and eventual tracking by Colombian authorities. Galan was 45 years old when he was shot on that stage. He left behind his wife and 3 children. The street in Soacha, where the rally took place, was later named in his memory. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Galan's case involved a man running for the most powerful office in his country. The next case is about a woman running a town most people outside Colombia had never heard of, and the cartel came for her the very morning after she took the job. Case 3. Gisela Mota Ocampo, Mayor of Temico, Mexico, 2016. Gisela Raquel Mota Ocampo was born on March 13, 1982, in Temico, a city of about 100,000 people in the Mexican state of Morelos, roughly 90 kilometers south of Mexico City. She grew up there, was educated there, and spent her entire political career working to represent it. She was single, lived with her parents in the Pueblo Viejo neighborhood of Temico, and had no children of her own. By 2013, she was serving as a federal deputy in the 62nd legislature of the Mexican Congress, representing Morelos under the Party of the Democratic Revolution, known by its Spanish initials as the PRD. She won the mayoral election for Temico in June 2015. On January 1, 2016, she was sworn in as mayor, the first woman ever elected to lead the city. Fewer than 24 hours later, she was gone. Temico sits on the highway that runs between Mexico City and Acapulco, which is also one of the most heavily used drug trafficking routes in southern Mexico. For years, the area had been a battleground between competing criminal groups, first under the Beltran Leyva organization, and then, after that group fractured, under several smaller gangs fighting to take over what it had left behind. The 2 most prominent of those gangs in Morelos were Los Rojos and Guerreros Unidos. Both operated in the same region, fought each other constantly, and made their money through a combination of drug trafficking, extortion, and control of local police forces. That last point, the control of local police, is what made mayors like Mota so important to them. Mayors in Mexico appoint local police chiefs. That appointment, in cartel terms, is worth everything. Morelos Governor Greco Ramirez had been working to change that dynamic. His plan was to replace independent municipal police forces with a single unified command across the state, one that would be harder for criminal groups to infiltrate and corrupt. Most incoming mayors in Morelos in January 2016 were under pressure from Los Rojos and Guerreros Unidos to reject this plan, to keep their police appointments separate, and to keep things the way they were. Mota had made her position clear when she took office. Her party described her, in a statement issued after her death, as a strong and brave woman who, on taking office, declared that her fight against crime would be frontal and direct. She backed the Unified Command Plan. That decision was read by Los Rojos as a refusal to play by their rules. On December 31st, 2015, the night before she became mayor, Gisela Mota posted on Facebook a photograph of herself holding her newborn nephew, wrapped in blankets. She wrote that he was, without a doubt, the best gift God could send them, and said she was feeling blessed. She became mayor the following morning. That night, she went home and slept in her parents' house, the same house she had grown up in. The morning of January 2nd, 2016, was a Saturday. Mota was still in her pajamas when a group of armed men jumped the wall surrounding her parents' home and entered the property. They were masked. According to her mother, Juanita Ocampo, who was present, Mota moved to protect her family. She identified herself to the attackers and surrendered herself so that they would leave her parents and her newborn nephew alone. Her mother told reporters directly. She told them, "I am Gisela. They took her because she was very brave." The attackers took Mota from her bedroom to the living room and shot her in front of her family. Mota's father ran after the men as they fled. Police responded quickly. They pursued the attackers in a vehicle chase through the city. The chase ended in a shootout. 2 of the suspected attackers were shot and killed by police. 3 others were taken into custody: a 32-year-old woman, an 18-year-old man, and a minor. When the arrested suspects were searched, police recovered a 9mm pistol, an Uzi submachine gun, bulletproof vests, and ski masks. A vehicle with plates from the state of Mexico was also seized. One of those arrested later told investigators they had been paid approximately $29,000 to carry out the operation. That same suspect told investigators that Mota's name was not the only one on their list. There were at least half a dozen other local officials targeted. Governor Ramirez confirmed publicly that the criminal group Los Rojos was responsible, stating that Mota was targeted specifically because she refused to allow the gang to operate in her jurisdiction, and because she had backed the unified police command that Los Rojos needed to dismantle. He described her death as a clear message to every mayor who had recently taken office in Morelos. Ramirez ordered 3 days of mourning across the state, had all flags on government buildings lowered to half-mast, and placed 15 municipalities, including Temisco and the state capital, Cuernavaca, under the Unified Police Command immediately. The Roman Catholic Bishop of Cuernavaca held Mass at her parents' home on the Sunday after her death. Mota was 33 years old. She had been mayor of Temisco for less than 1 full day. The Association of Local Authorities of Mexico stated in the days following her death that nearly 100 mayors had been targeted and attacked across Mexico in the decade prior. Gisela Mota's name was added to that list before she had even unpacked her desk. In the next case, the politician had more time, years, in fact, to push back against the criminal organization targeting her. She survived 3 attempts on her life before they finally got to her. Case 4. Maria Santos Gorostieta Salazar, Mayor of Tiquicheo, Mexico, 2008 to 2011. Maria Santos Gorostieta Salazar was born in 1976 in Tiquicheo, a small rural town in the western Mexican state of Michoacán. She grew up there, trained as a physician at the Universidad Michoacana de San Nicolás de Hidalgo in Morelia, and earned a doctorate in medicine. She had 3 children. Her first husband was José Sánchez Chávez, himself a former mayor of Tiquicheo. When she was elected mayor of the town in 2008 under the Institutional Revolutionary Party, she stepped into a place that most politicians in Mexico would have avoided entirely: Michoacán was at the heart of the country's conflict with organized crime.
La Familia Michoacana, a criminal organization that had built itself around a twisted sense of religious identity while running drug production across the state, operated openly through the region. The Knights Templar cartel would later emerge from its remnants. Both groups demanded that local officials work with them, stay silent, or step aside. Gorostieta refused all three options. From the start of her term, she received threats. Rather than withdrawing or keeping quiet, she continued meeting publicly with farmers, ranchers, students, and elderly residents. She spoke openly against organized crime groups operating in the area and refused to accept payments from them. Most of her colleagues, as the Lancet would later note in a formal tribute, chose to cooperate with the groups or were corrupted through regular payments. Gorostieta chose neither. That choice put her on a list, and the people who made that list were not patient. In January 2009, her husband, Jose Sanchez Chavez, was targeted by an armed group. He escaped that time. The next attempt came in October 2009, and it did not miss. Gorostieta was traveling with her husband through the town of El Limone when gunmen opened fire on their vehicle. Jose Sanchez Chavez was struck by 3 gunshot wounds and died that day. His wife survived, badly wounded, taken to hospital in Morelia, but only because the attackers believed she was already dead and drove away. She had 3 young children at home. She recovered and went back to work. 3 months later, on January 23, 2010, she was attacked again. This time, she was returning from a local government event in Ciudad Altamirano, in the neighboring state of Guerrero, traveling with 4 other people, including a journalist from El Sol de Morelia and the head of the Women's Institute in Tiquicheo. Armed men intercepted the vehicle and opened fire. The van was hit by approximately 30 bullets. 3 found Gorostieta in the abdomen, chest, and leg. The vehicle crashed after the shooting. She was taken to hospital with severe injuries. The wounds never fully healed. She was left in constant pain for the rest of her life and required a colostomy bag permanently. After the second attempt, some people questioned whether the attacks had really happened. In January 2011, she responded to that directly by publishing photographs of herself in Tiquicheo's municipal newsletter, Contacto Ciudadano. She stood half-dressed in the images, showing the full extent of her surgical scars to anyone who wanted to look. She wrote alongside them, "It is living testimony that I am a woman with strength and fortitude, that despite my physical and mental wounds, I am still standing." She pledged to continue fighting, true to her ideals and her convictions, convinced that the truth would make them free. Her own party, the PRI, had urged her to resign after the attacks and offered her almost no protection. She refused to resign, left the PRI, and joined the Party of the Democratic Revolution in August 2010. She ran for a seat in the National Congress under her new party. She did not win. She finished her mayoral term in 2011, remarried, this time to Nereo Patiño Delgado, who had been her bodyguard assigned after the 2010 attack, and returned to private life with her 3 children, Malusi, Jose, and Daisy. When her mayoral term ended in 2011, her official police protection ended with it. She had no security detail. She drove herself, lived her life, raised her children. On the morning of November 12, 2012, she was in Morelia driving her young daughter to school. At approximately 8:30 in the morning, a vehicle cut her off. 2 armed men got out and forced her from her car in front of witnesses on the street. According to people who saw what happened, she pleaded with the men to leave her daughter alone. She agreed to go with them voluntarily. Her daughter was left at the roadside. Her family waited for a ransom call that never came. After 2 days without contact, they reported her missing to police. On November 15, 2012, farm workers heading to work in the rural community of San Juan Tararameo in Cuitzeo Township found a body. It was Maria Santos Gorostieta Salazar. Post-mortem examination showed she had died from a traumatic brain injury caused by repeated, severe blows to the head. The governor of Michoacán confirmed that organized crime was responsible. She was 36 years old. She was buried in a local cemetery in Tiquicheo alongside her first husband, José Sánchez Chávez, the man who had been taken from her in the very first attack 3 years earlier. The Lancet, one of the world's most respected medical journals, published a tribute to her in February 2013, describing her as a heroine of the 21st century for her refusal to take payments from criminal organizations and her decision to keep serving her community despite everything that had been done to her. More than 24 sitting mayors were targeted and attacked in Mexico during the years she was in office. She was among the very few who refused every offer and survived as long as she did. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case in this series is different in one important way. That politician never even got a chance to finish his first week. The cartel took him apart before he had time to take a single meaningful action in office. Case 5. Alejandro Arcos Catalan, Mayor of Chilpancingo, Mexico, 2024. Alejandro Arcos Catalan was born on February 12, 1981, in Chilpancingo de los Bravo, the capital city of the Mexican state of Guerrero. He grew up there, studied political science and public administration at the Universidad Sentimientos de la Nación, and spent his career in government and public service. He worked as director of Cadastre for the city in 2009, later became general director of Guerrero's Institute for Comprehensive Care for Older Adults, and served as a member of the state legislature representing the 1st District under the Party of the Democratic Revolution. He was a husband and a father. He had tried twice before to become mayor of his hometown, once in 2021, unsuccessfully. In 2024, he ran again, this time as the candidate for a coalition of the PRI, PAN, and PRD parties. He won by approximately 1,700 votes in the June 2024 election. He took office on September 30th, 2024. He was given 6 days. Chilpancingo is not a small, forgotten town. It is a city of around 300,000 people, the administrative capital of one of Mexico's most violent states. Guerrero sits on the Pacific coast, produces significant quantities of poppy and marijuana, and has long been carved up between competing criminal organizations. By 2024, the city itself was controlled by a battle between two groups, Los Ardillos and Los Tlacos, both of which had grown out of the remnants of the Beltran Leyva organization. Neither group had any interest in a mayor who did not cooperate with them. The previous mayor, Norma Otilia Hernández, had been secretly filmed meeting with Celso Ortega Jimenez, the leader of Los Ardillos, at a restaurant. That footage became public, and she was expelled from her party. The man who replaced her had grown up watching all of that happen in his own city. During the 2024 campaign, Arcos was allowed to hold events in areas controlled by Los Ardillos, the only candidate in the race given that access. According to Wikipedia, in exchange for their support, he had agreed to give the group a portion of the city's public works contracts. But once he took office, he made clear in his first public address that he would not be making any formal arrangements with criminal groups. He said his main commitment was to ensure peace and security in Chilpancingo through cooperation with the Mexican army. He announced a plan he called Blindaje Chilpancingo, shielding Chilpancingo, focused on strengthening local police, improving surveillance technology, and building investigation capacity. He also stated publicly that he wanted to pursue peace between Los Ardillos and Los Tlacos, rather than favor either side. That attempt at neutrality, according to Inside Crime, may have been exactly what got him targeted. The violence directed at his administration did not wait. On September 27, 2024,
3 days before he even took office. The man Arcos had chosen to head municipal public security,
Ulises Hernandez Martinez, the former director of the Guerrero State Police's Special Forces Unit, was shot and taken from his car, along with a woman traveling with him. 2 days after Arcos was sworn in, on October 3, 2024, his General Secretary, Francisco Gonzalo Tapia Gutierrez, was shot and killed 2 blocks from the municipal palace in Chilpancingo's Central Square. Tapia had been in his new position for 2 days. Arcos went on a radio program called Por la Mañana on October 4th and publicly requested protection from the Guerrero governor for himself, his cabinet members, and the people of the city. He described Tapia as an honorable man who had always dedicated himself to serving the community. He asked for more security. None arrived. On the morning of October 6, 2024, Arcos spent time in the Plan de Ayala neighborhood of Chilpancingo, assessing damage caused by Hurricane John and distributing water and supplies to residents who had been affected. He shared photographs of the visit on social media. That afternoon, he left his staff behind and traveled alone to attend what officials later described as a private meeting. He was expected to arrive at a community called Tepechicotlan. He never got there. His remains were found later that day in the Villa del Roble neighborhood of the city, inside a white Volkswagen pickup truck. He was 43 years old. Mexico's Secretary of Security, Omar Garcia Harfuch, confirmed that Arcos had gone to the nearby town of Petaquillas alone, without security, before his disappearance. Guerrero state prosecutors launched an investigation. In November 2024, Guerrero authorities arrested Germán Reyes, a retired military captain turned special prosecutor who had most recently served as security chief for Chilpancingo, on charges of homicide in connection with Arcos's death. The arrest confirmed what many had already suspected, that the network around Arcos had been infiltrated before he even had a chance to govern. A former official, someone entrusted with the city's own security apparatus, was linked to the operation that took his life. His predecessor, Norma Otilia Hernandez, had been caught meeting with Los Ardillos and expelled. The security chief he had chosen was eliminated before he took office. His general secretary was shot within days of being sworn in. A prosecutor turned security official was later arrested for the killing itself. Every layer of protection around Arcos had been removed or corrupted before any of it could function. He had been in office for 6 days. His death was, as Inside Crime put it at the time, an ominous sign of the security crisis facing Mexico and a demonstration of precisely who was running Chilpancingo. The city buried him on October 7, 2024. PRI national leader Alejandro Moreno said of both Arcos and Tapia, they were young and honest public servants who were seeking progress for their community. His assassination marked the first time in Chilpancingo's history that a sitting mayor of the state capital had ever been taken from office in this way. In the next case, a politician across the country faced a very similar situation. A city dominated by one of Mexico's most powerful criminal organizations, but his refusal to submit became the most documented and public act of defiance in recent Mexican political history. Case 6. Carlos Alberto Manso Rodriguez, Mayor of Uruapan, Mexico, 2025. Carlos Alberto Manso Rodriguez was born on April 9, 1985, in Uruapan, the second largest city in the Mexican state of Michoacán, known internationally as the avocado capital of the world. He was the son of Juan Manso Ceja, founder of the first gallery for visual artists in Uruapan, a man who had led a public protest against electoral fraud in the city back in 1992. Carlos studied political science and public administration at ITESO,
a Jesuit university in Guadalajara.
He worked as an auditor for Mexico's Social Security Institute between 2017 and 2018. He was married to Grecia Itzel Quiroz Garcia, and they had 2 children together. He ran for federal deputy in 2018 as an independent and lost. In 2021, he ran again, this time under the Morena party, and won. He served in Congress until 2024, when Morena chose not to nominate him for the Uruapan mayoral race. He left the party, ran independently, and won by a landslide, 66% of the vote in a 6-way race. He took office on September 1, 2024, as Uruapan's first ever independent mayor. Uruapan sits in cartel territory, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as the CJNG, had spent years embedding itself in Michoacan's agricultural economy, specifically targeting avocado and lime farmers with extortion payments. Small and medium producers, those who could not afford private security, were particularly vulnerable. Manzo had grown up in this city. He understood exactly what he was stepping into. He declared zero tolerance for organized crime from day one, authorized his municipal police to use force against criminals who attacked the public or resisted arrest, banned officers from wearing ski masks on duty, and personally patrolled streets in a bulletproof vest. A citizens' movement formed around him, identifiable by straw hats. People called it the movement of the hat. Security analysts confirmed he was different from other mayors in the region. David Saucedo, a Mexico City security consultant, was quoted by CBC News saying that most mayors in the area submit to criminal organizations, and that Manzo was a clear exception. In August 2025, Manzo's municipal police arrested René Belmonte, known by the alias El Reno, the CJNG's regional boss in Uruapan, responsible for running the cartel's extortion network across the area. Manzo announced the arrest on social media and immediately warned residents to stay indoors, saying armed CJNG operatives were attempting to enter the city in response. He simultaneously requested emergency support from Mexico's Federal Security Secretary, the Army, the Navy, and the National Guard, publicly naming each institution. The federal government eventually deployed 300 security personnel to Uruapan on September 30, 2025. They were withdrawn 2 weeks later. Manzo publicly stated he believed the withdrawal happened because he had symbolically shut down a state government construction project in the city, a cable car he viewed as a misuse of public money. He posted video after video on social media, asking for military-grade assistance. His requests were not met. On the evening of November 1, 2025, Manzo attended Uruapan's Festival de las Velas, the Festival of Candles, the city's traditional Day of the Dead celebration. He was in the central plaza with his family, speaking with residents and posing for photographs. His last words, captured in a video on his social media that evening, were, "We are having a very pleasant day in the company of thousands of families from Uruapan, Michoacan, Mexico, and other countries." At approximately 8:10 in the evening, shortly after he had set down his infant son, a gunman approached from behind and fired. 3 bullets struck Manzo in the back and abdomen. He fell face down on the plaza floor. Emergency services took him to the Fray Juan de San Miguel Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 8:50 p.m. He was 40 years old. A city councilor and a bodyguard were also wounded. The gunman, 17-year-old Victor Manuel Ubaldo Vidales from the nearby municipality of Paracho, was shot and killed at the scene by security personnel. 2 additional suspects were arrested. Michoacan State Attorney General Carlos Torres Piña confirmed on November 6th that the attacker was linked to the CJNG. On November 18th, Security Secretary Omar Garcia Harfuch announced the arrest of Jorge Armando, known as El Licenciado, the CJNG operative who investigators say gave direct instructions for the cell to track Manzo's movements and carry out the attack. By February 2026, 3 additional suspects with confirmed links to the CJNG had been arrested. Authorities also investigated 7 of Manzo's own bodyguards for suspected involvement by omission in the attack, raising questions about how thoroughly his own security detail had been compromised. Manzo's wife, Grecia Quiros, was sworn in as his successor on November 5, 2025. At her swearing in, she said, "They killed Carlos Manzo, but they couldn't kill what he awakened." Protests swept across Uruapan, Morelia, and Mexico City in the days that followed. At his funeral, Michoacán Governor Alfredo Ramírez Bedoya was booed and driven from the ceremony by crowds shouting that he bore responsibility for what had happened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Manzo was the 7th sitting mayor taken from office in Mexico in 2025 alone. The next case on this list shows that the pattern of targeting politicians who refuse to cooperate with criminal organizations is not limited to Mexico. It stretches across the continent, and the next politician paid the highest price for the same refusal. Case 7. Edgar Eusebio Millán Gómez, Acting Commissioner of Mexico's Federal Police, 2008. Edgar Eusebio Millán Gómez was born in Mexico City in 1967. He earned a law degree from the Universidad del Valle de México and went straight into federal law enforcement after graduating, receiving training in multiple countries before building a career that took him to the very top of Mexico's national police structure. By the time he reached his early 30s, he was already running complex anti-kidnapping operations. In 2000, he helped capture Andrés Caletri, one of the most feared professional kidnappers in Mexican history, and dismantled 2 major abduction networks operating out of the capital. In 2001, he was named head of anti-kidnapping operations for Mexico's Federal Agency of Investigation, the country's closest equivalent to the FBI. In 2005, his team captured 5 suspects involved in the abduction of Rubén Omar Romano, the coach of the Cruz Azul soccer club. He was exactly the kind of official that criminal organizations in Mexico most needed to remove from the board. On March 1, 2008, Millán was named Acting Commissioner of the Federal Preventive Police, making him the effective head of the entire national force at 41 years old. His appointment came during one of the most intense periods of the Mexican government's campaign against organized crime. President Felipe Calderón had declared a nationwide offensive against criminal organizations in 2006 and had deployed more than 24,000 soldiers across the country. Millán was put in charge of coordinating operations between the federal police and those military forces, a central, visible, and extremely dangerous position to hold. The arrest that led directly to his death happened on January 21, 2008, less than 2 months before he became acting commissioner. Mexican Army Special Forces units captured Alfredo Beltrán Leiva, known by the alias El Mochomo, in Culiacán, Sinaloa. Beltrán Leiva was one of 5 brothers at the top of one of Mexico's most powerful trafficking organizations. When he was taken in, soldiers found 2 suitcases containing $900,000 in cash, luxury watches, 20 fragmentation grenades, rifles, automatic weapons, and 40 bulletproof vests, 8 of which were embroidered with the letters FEDA, the Spanish initials for Special Forces of Arturo, referring to his brother Arturo Beltrán Leiva. The arrest was a major blow to the organization. Millán held the press conference announcing it, stood before cameras in Mexico City, and told the country that the cartel was operating inside the capital itself. He named the threat directly and publicly. The Beltrán Leiva brothers responded by blaming El Chapo, Joaquín Guzmán of the Sinaloa cartel, for tipping off the government about Alfredo's location. That accusation triggered a full split between the 2 organizations and launched a wave of targeted operations against federal officials.
3 men with assault rifles and grenade launchers were arrested in Mexico City in a plot to take out José Luis Santiago Vasconcelos, the prosecutor overseeing drug lord extraditions. Millan also announced the January raid that found 11 alleged cartel operatives in 2 Mexico City safe houses loaded with weapons. He was the public face of every operation that was hurting the Beltran Leyva network. On May 1, 2008, 1 week before his death, Millan held another press conference announcing arrests and cash seizures tied to the Sinaloa cartel. He was doing his job in full public view, and the organizations he was targeting were watching.
On the night of May 7th, into the early hours of May 8, 2008, Millan returned to his apartment in a modest neighborhood in Mexico City called Colonia Guerrero. His colleagues noted he chose to live there specifically because of its proximity to federal law enforcement offices. He arrived just after midnight. When he opened the door to his building, a man named Alejandro Ramirez Baez was waiting for him inside. Ramirez Baez opened fire at point-blank range. Millan was hit 8 times in the chest and once in the hand. 2 bodyguards were wounded in the attack, but managed to detain Ramirez Baez. Millan was taken to Metropolitan Hospital, where he died a few hours later. He was 41 years old. Intelligence officials confirmed almost immediately that the attack was ordered in retaliation for the arrest of Alfredo Beltran Leyva 4 months earlier. In June 2011, a federal judge sentenced Alejandro Ramirez Baez to 60 years in prison for carrying out the operation on behalf of the Beltran Leyva organization. His funeral was attended by President Felipe Calderón, the general of the Mexican Army, and the highest-ranking officials across Mexico's security apparatus. The Washington Post described him as the public face of Mexico's offensive against criminal organizations. George Grayson, a Mexico expert at the College of William and Mary, said at the time that when you can take out someone like Millan, careful, experienced, and well-protected, no one is safe. He was the 3rd top federal police official to be taken from office inside a single week in Mexico City. Millan's case is important because it shows that these operations against politicians and officials were not random acts of rage. They were planned, patient, and precise, carried out after months of calculation. The next case on this list is the story of a man who faced that same kind of calculation, but he never even held a law enforcement position. His only crime was running for president and saying out loud that he intended to win. Case 8. Fernando Villavicencio, Presidential Candidate Ecuador, 2023. Fernando Alcibiades Villavicencio Valencia was born on October 12, 1963, in Alausi, a small town in the Andean province of Chimborazo in Ecuador. He grew up in a working-class environment and started in journalism as a teenager, hosting a cultural radio program at 17, and later founding a small newspaper focused on workers' rights that put him in conflict with the military dictatorship then ruling the country. He studied journalism and later worked for El Universo, one of Ecuador's largest newspapers. In 1995, he co-founded the Pachakutik Party, a political movement representing indigenous communities and environmental causes. He then joined Petro Ecuador, the state oil company, where he worked in communications and eventually became a union leader. He was married to Veronica Saraus, and together they had 5 children. Over the course of his career, he produced an estimated 260 investigative reports and wrote 10 books exposing billion-dollar frauds, corruption inside government ministries, and the infiltration of criminal organizations into Ecuador's political system. He was not the kind of person who backed down when told to stop writing. Ecuador, for most of the 20th century, was known in the region as an island of peace, a country that had largely avoided the cartel violence devastating its neighbors, Colombia and Peru. That began changing in the 2000s and accelerated sharply through 2021 and 2022, as international trafficking networks moved through the country's Pacific ports and domestic gangs aligned with those networks took control of territory.
The homicide rate in Ecuador doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone. Two main Ecuadorian gang networks, Los Choneros and Los Lobos, had grown into significant criminal organizations with thousands of members, operating from inside the country's prisons and maintaining connections to Mexican cartels, including the Sinaloa cartel. By 2023, when Ecuador called a snap election after President Guillermo Lasso dissolved the National Assembly, at least 7 politicians or candidates had already been taken from office in the electoral cycle. Fernando Villavicencio decided to run for president anyway.
His campaign platform was direct: crack down on criminal organizations, expose their links to the political system, and end the impunity that had allowed them to operate openly. He had already named José Adolfo Macías, a gang leader known as Fito, who ran Los Choneros from inside a prison, as a direct threat to his safety. He told journalists he had received death threats from affiliates of the Sinaloa cartel, in addition to domestic gang leaders. His campaign advisor confirmed at least 3 formal threats had been reported to authorities, one of which led to an arrest. Before some rallies, Villavicencio told crowds he would not wear a bulletproof vest. At one event, he said, "Let the crime bosses come. Let the paid hitmen come. The time for threats is over. Here I am." On August 9, 2023, 11 days before the first round of voting, Villavicencio held a campaign rally at the Colegio Anderson in the northern part of Quito. At 6:20 in the evening, as he was leaving the school and walking toward his vehicle, a gunman opened fire. During the attack, the assailant also threw a grenade, which failed to detonate. Villavicencio was struck in the head. He was rushed to a nearby clinic and pronounced dead. He was 59 years old. The gunman, later identified as 18-year-old Johan David Castillo Lopez, a Colombian national from Cali, was shot and killed at the scene by security personnel. 6 Colombian nationals were arrested in the hours that followed. Police raids recovered a rifle, a machine gun, 4 pistols, 3 grenades, 2 rifle magazines, 4 boxes of ammunition, 2 motorcycles, and a stolen vehicle linked to the operation. Ecuador's president declared a nationwide state of emergency and requested assistance from the FBI. The election was not postponed. Voting took place on August 20th, as scheduled, with Villavicencio replaced on the ballot by journalist Christian Zurita. In July 2024, 5 people were sentenced in connection with the operation. Carlos Edwin Angulo, known as El Invisible, a leader of the Los Lobos gang who coordinated the hit from inside a prison, received 34 years and 8 months. Laura Dayanara Castillo, who financed and managed the logistics of the assassination team, received the same sentence. 3 accomplices involved in tracking Villavicencio's movements received 12 years each. A witness at trial stated there had been a $200,000 payment connected to the operation. 6 of the original Colombian suspects, arrested immediately after the attack, were taken from custody and found dead inside Ecuadorian prisons within 2 months of their arrest, eliminating the most direct witnesses before they could testify. The question of who ultimately ordered the operation remains officially unanswered. Villavicencio's family has publicly stated they do not believe the convictions reflect the full scope of those responsible. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next case on this list takes us back to Mexico, where a man who built one of the country's first armed civilian self-defense movements against criminal organizations was tracked, ambushed, and taken from his own hometown, despite surviving multiple prior attempts on his life. Case 9. Hipólito Mora Chávez. Founder of Mexico's first anti-cartel self-defense movement, 2023. Hipólito Mora Chávez was born on July 26, 1955, in La Ruana, a small farming community of roughly 10,000 people in the Tierra Caliente region of Michoacán, one of the most cartel-saturated states in Mexico. His father died when he was young,
and his mother raised him and 9 siblings by selling a traditional corn drink called atole from a stall near the town market. He grew up working the land. By adulthood, he owned 15 hectares of lime orchards and some cattle. He was a farmer. He was not a politician by training or by ambition, and he was not a law enforcement official of any kind.
He had no title, no office, and no salary. What he had was a lime farm that criminal organizations had decided they controlled, and a temper that did not adjust well to being told what to do by people pointing weapons at him. The Knights Templar cartel had taken over Tierra Caliente in the years before 2013. It was a sophisticated criminal organization with a pseudo-religious identity. Its leaders distributed pamphlets and presented themselves as protectors of the poor, while simultaneously running drug production, extortion, and protection rackets across western Michoacán. What it meant in practice for lime farmers in La Ruana was that the cartel decided when they could harvest, which days they could work, and where they could sell their fruit. Packing house owners told growers directly that the real bosses were the cartel, not them. Mora found this out personally when his son could not deliver a harvest. He walked to the packing house with a pistol and said the harvest would be received. That kind of direct confrontation was not unusual for him. What was unusual was what he decided to do next. On February 24, 2013, Mora organized a meeting in the town center of La Ruana. He invited his neighbors. He laid out what everyone already knew, but had not said together in one place. The extortion had to stop. The cartel had to be confronted, and the community would have to do it themselves because the government was not coming. By noon that day, residents of La Ruana had disarmed the municipal police, taken 2 patrol vehicles, and formed their own armed self-defense force. 2 hours later, the same thing happened in the nearby town of Tepalcatepec. Within weeks, the movement had spread to other municipalities across Michoacán. On a wall at the entrance to La Ruana, someone painted the date and the words, "The day La Ruana woke up." The movement became known nationally and internationally as the Autodefensas, the self-defense groups. The Autodefensas did not have military training, government support, or significant resources at the start. What they had was the willingness of farming communities who had reached a breaking point. By 2014, after months of armed standoffs, the Knights Templar cartel had been driven out of Michoacán, with eventual assistance from the Mexican federal government and military. It was one of the only times in that period of Mexican history that a criminal organization of that scale was expelled from a region by the communities it had been preying on. Mora was seen as the face of the movement. He was given the nickname El Comandante. But the victory did not hold. In 2014, Mora was arrested on murder charges following a violent clash between his self-defense faction and a rival group. 11 people were killed in that confrontation, including Mora's own son, Manuel. He spent months in prison before the charges were dropped and he was released. When he came out, he found that the criminal organization filling the power vacuum left by the Knights Templar was called Los Viagras, a faction of what had become known as Carteles Unidos, and that this group had infiltrated significant parts of the self-defense movement itself. By 2016, Mora was publicly saying the autodefensas had become what he called a farce due to criminal infiltration. He had helped build a movement, watched it succeed, watched it be corrupted, and was now one of the only original leaders who had stayed in La Ruana and kept talking. He ran for federal deputy in 2015 under one party, failed. Ran under another affiliation in 2018, failed. In 2020, he was nominated as gubernatorial candidate for Michoacán, ran in the 2021 state elections, and received approximately 54,000 votes, 3.13% of the total. finishing 5th in a multi-candidate race. He lost every political campaign he ever entered. He stayed in La Ruana anyway, living on his lime farm, keeping his security detail, and continuing to speak publicly about cartel activity in the region. He specifically named Eladio Cisneros, known as La Sirena, a leader of Los Viagras, as the man running a methamphetamine laboratory network across Tierra Caliente. He accused the same man of being behind 2 separate attempts on his life. On November 26, 2022, gunmen attacked Mora in La Ruana. His bodyguards responded and shot the 2 attackers. Mora survived. On March 5, 2023, attackers approached him near a workshop close to his home and opened fire again. His bodyguards again returned fire. He was wounded, but not seriously. After that second attempt, Michoacán Governor Alfredo Ramírez Bedoya ordered Mora to relocate permanently to Morelia, the state capital, for his own protection. Mora had been living in Morelia for some time, but on June 29, 2023, he returned to La Ruana. His brother Guadalupe saw a convoy of white pickup trucks entering the town and immediately called him. Mora told him he knew they were coming. At approximately 10 in the morning, while traveling in a government-assigned Level 5 armored Chevrolet Suburban with 2 state police escorts, Mora's convoy was cut off by at least 5 pickup trucks. The attackers opened fire with high-caliber weapons, including Barrett .50 caliber rifles. The armored vehicle could not stop rounds of that power. Mora and 3 bodyguards were killed. The vehicle was then set on fire. Authorities confirmed all 4 deaths. 3 of the dead were members of his government-assigned security detail. The Michoacán State Prosecutor's Office launched an investigation. The Viagras cartel was identified as the likely group behind the attack. Mora's brother Guadalupe, speaking from inside his home, where cartel members were openly patrolling the streets of La Ruana outside, told reporters that the government had abandoned his brother. He said that if authorities did not act, armed self-defense groups would rise again. Hipólito Mora was 67 years old. His sister Olivia said at the funeral that he had looked out for his town, for his people, and that none of them had the courage to do what he had done. The final case in this series takes us to a man whose refusal to cooperate with criminal organizations cost him everything. Not over years, and not after repeated prior attacks, but within a single week of taking office as Colombia's most powerful law enforcement official. Case 10. Carlos Mauro Hoyos Jimenez, Attorney General of Colombia, 1988. Carlos Mauro Hoyos Jimenez was born on July 26, 1939, in Támesis, a small town in the department of Antioquia in the coffee-growing heart of Colombia. He studied law at the University of Medellín, specializing in constitutional law, and built a career through the lower rungs of Colombian public service: municipal judge, town councilor for El Retiro, deputy and treasurer for the Department of Antioquia, and eventually a member of the Colombian Congress multiple times as a representative of the Liberal Party. He also served as General Secretary of the Liberal Party at the national level. He was methodical, experienced, and by the time he was appointed to the highest prosecutorial office in Colombia in September 1987, he was 48 years old and had spent his entire career inside the legal system. He took office at what he himself described publicly as one of the most critical moments in Colombian history. The Medellín cartel in 1987 was at the height of its power. Pablo Escobar and the trafficking network he ran alongside figures including the Ochoa brothers and Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha had been supplying an estimated 80% of all cocaine entering the United States. The cartel had already demonstrated, through years of targeted operations against judges,
journalists, and government officials that it was willing to attack anyone who got in the way of its core demand.
That Colombia never extradited citizens to the United States to face trial in American courts. The extraditables, a faction of the cartel that operated under the motto of preferring a Colombian grave to an American jail cell, had been conducting a campaign of threats and violence against anyone connected to extradition proceedings. 14 judges and at least 8 journalists had been taken from office in the 30 months before Hoyos took office. Hoyos walked into that environment and immediately made himself a target. He established a close working relationship with the United States Drug Enforcement Administration. He ordered an investigation into 2 judges who had authorized the release of alleged Medellín cartel figure Jorge Luis Ochoa Vázquez, who had been sought by the United States for extradition at the time. He stood before the Colombian Senate and said plainly that investigations into the attacks on public figures were never resolved because fear had Colombia in a state of siege, and that those behind the violence had as their accomplices all the people too terrified to act. He was not quiet, and he was not cautious. The operation against Hoyos began with the kidnapping of Andrés Pastrana Arango, a mayoral candidate for Bogotá, and the son of former Colombian President Misael Pastrana, who was taken from his campaign office on January 18, 1988. Pastrana was held by the extraditables as a pressure tool against the government. On the morning of January 25, 1988, 1 week after Pastrana's kidnapping, and while police were still searching for him, Hoyos was driven toward José María Cordova Airport outside Rio Negro, near Medellín, for a scheduled flight to Bogotá. Multiple armed men ambushed the convoy. Both of his bodyguards, Jorge Enrique Loaiza and Gonzalo Villegas, were taken from office in the attack. Hoyos was wounded in the leg and taken from the scene. The extraditables called the Attorney General's office in Bogotá and told a spokeswoman that they were responsible and that Hoyos had been taken as part of their campaign against extradition. Hoyos was brought to a ranch in the area around El Retiro, approximately 3 miles south of Medellín. Colombian military units launched search operations in the area. During those operations, police located the ranch where Andrés Pastrana was being held captive and freed him. When Escobar learned that Pastrana had been rescued, according to the confession of his hitman, John Jairo Velázquez, known as Popeye, Escobar ordered Hoyos taken from life immediately, partly to show that the government's success did not come without a cost, and partly because the original plan to hold a mock political trial of Hoyos had become impossible to execute with the military closing in. Hoyos was found later that day near a dried riverbed outside Medellín. He had been handcuffed, bound, gagged, and taken from office. He was 48 years old. The UPI Wire report from that same day, January 25, 1988, quoted a regional spokesperson from the Attorney General's office as confirming the death. The body was described as riddled with bullets. Former Colombian President Misael Pastrana, father of the man who had just been rescued, said that the fulfillment of the Constitution and the defense of human rights had cost Hoyos his life. Senator Ernesto Samper said the country was living through an obscure night. A spokesman for the Antioquia provincial government said simply, "The country is finished." The reaction of President Virgilio Barco's government was immediate. Within days, a new legal framework called the Statute for Defending the Democracy was introduced, creating severe penalties for narco-terrorism. The government did not negotiate. The DEA confirmed in its own briefing documents that the kidnapping and taking from office of Carlos Mauro Hoyos was one of the pivotal acts of narco-terrorism committed by the Medellín cartel during its campaign to make extradition politically impossible. He appears on that DEA list alongside the taking from office of Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla in 1984 and the taking from office of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán in 1989, the same 3 events that defined the arc of Colombia's most dangerous decade.
Hoyos was the highest-ranking justice official in Colombia to be taken from office by organized crime up to that point. He had been in office for 4 months. Of all the cases in this series, his may be the most direct illustration of the core dynamic. A man given the most powerful law enforcement position in his country, confronting the most powerful criminal network in the Western Hemisphere, was taken from office not because of a long-running confrontation or because of a campaign that had built over years, but because he had been in the job for a single season and had already made himself the most dangerous person in Colombia to the people who needed extradition to never happen. If you enjoyed this breakdown,
Make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.